The Club Championship Show on OTB Sports in partnership with AIB, proud sponsors of the Football, Hurling and Camogie All-Ireland Club Championships. Hashtag the toughest.
You are very welcome along to the Club Championship Show here on OTB Sports, brought to you by AIB. A real sense of deja vu about the All-Ireland Club Camogie final, which is coming up in 2 weeks' time. It is going to be Sarsfields against Owlert the Balla once again. Really just a few weeks. We go back to the end of December when they met in an All-Ireland final, which was won by Owlert. It is the last two champions once again meeting for the right to be crowned champions for the club year of 2021. Commentating on Owlert's win against Scariff at the weekend was Killian Whelan. He's here to join me now to look back on both games. Killian, how are you getting on?
Good morning to you, Will. How are you?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a strange one. We'll talk to Sarah Donovan in a moment about the fallout from last weekend and maybe what we've learned ahead of this final. But it's quite remarkable to have two All-Ireland finals, firstly, running so close together, and again, to have the same teams competing again so recently since they met at the end of December in Nolan Park.
Yeah, absolutely, and we know that flows down into the intermediate and junior grades as well, as things have happened over the weekend. But yeah, fascinating that it is. But I think it's been a motivational factor, probably with those teams to keep going. Will, and no doubt about it. Especially with Owlert, were hit badly with COVID just around the Christmas time, so straight after their victory, and were able to, be without each other. I think for about 3 weeks, I think collectively, and then they eventually got a nice little run in ahead of the game against Scariff. You'd hardly know they missed out in 3 weeks together, such was their emphatic victory against Scariff at the weekend. But yeah, fascinating that it is, and I think it's something obviously that Sarsfields are still hurting over, that defeat in Nolan Park. So I think that again was a huge driving factor in them getting back, especially as they wouldn't have had the competitive outings that obviously Owlert had. Now Owlert have probably only had one more than Sarsfields had ultimately, but still it was a battling performance out of Sarsfields then down in Gorey on Sunday.
Yeah, retesting weekend, given that we had two storms over the weekend, and understandably pitches were very wet underfoot. We had wind being a major factor in both of these semi-finals as well. We saw the results up on screen just a moment ago, but just to remind you, Owlert the Balla 3 goals and 11 points, Scariff 2 points. That was the one in Clonmel that Killian was commenting on for the Camogie Association. And then Sarsfields edging out Slough-Neil after extra time, two of the last 3 champions meeting in that semi-final, and Sarsfields of Galway in the end winning by 2 goals and 4 points to 9 points, which sets up a trip to Croke Park for both teams, which is coming up on Sunday week. Delighted to say that we've got former Dublin and Cork player Sarah Donovan with us as well to look back at the semi-finals. Sarah, how are you getting on this morning?
Good. I'm already looking forward to the 6th of March. I think it's going to be a cracker of a game.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Killian was saying to the Owlert management and players afterwards, it's going to feel very different to last weekend, where it was a bit of a slog for the players. In the case of Owlert, they got 1-7 with the wind, and that determined so much about that semi-final. No matter what the weather is going to be like, and we saw snow there when Slough-Neil won a few years ago, it doesn't really matter about the conditions, because Croke Park is going to be an absolutely pristine surface that you could bring a storm that weekend, and Croke Park is not going to be a factor with that.
I agree with that, and I think the speed of the teams that are going to be playing in the final, they need that kind of surface to be able to showcase those players in the best light. The Camogie Association unfortunately got some bad press again this weekend with the fixture for Slough-Neil and Sarsfields and bringing it to Wexford. But I think now is the opportunity in Croke Park to show the talent and get talking about the players and their skill set, rather than the likes of Eddie Brennan tweeting about the fact that the game's on in Wexford. That's why we need a pristine surface in Croke Park, because we want to showcase the best of Sarsfields and the best of Owlert the Balla.
Yeah, but we may as well talk about the venue now before we start getting into the players then, because Killian, you and I were tweeting back and forth about this at the weekend as well, and I kind of held my powder dry for a little while on it, because I wanted to have a quick look after work to see what pitches were available, because so much was going on and going off on Saturday. And by my reckoning, because of the full schedule of ladies football games which were on Sunday, plus the Football League, plus games that were taking place in third level competitions last weekend too, and schools games, realistically I think there were only 3 venues that were available that would have been considered suitable halfway venues. To me that was Hawkfield, Newbridge or Abbottstown, and there was already a junior semi-final I think in Abbottstown, and there was an intermediate one that weekend as well. So really the amount of venues that were available were quite minimal when you consider how many games were called off at venues across the country, particularly county grounds in the middle of the country. Now Gorey seems crazy because it's as far away as you can possibly get from Slough-Neil, and probably from Sarsfields travelling across the country as well. But realistically, there weren't too many venues that were available at 25 hours notice last weekend.
No, and that's it, and that's something that obviously has to be factored into this, Will, that, Nevena, fair play to them, they stepped up in a moment of crisis, I would think, for the Camogie Association, because I believe venues were contacted in every possible location from official quarters. That's what I'm being told, despite what maybe the hurlers on the ditch and people on Twitter seem to think. But I believe that, they just across the Midlands, North Midlands, I suppose, if you want to reflect on that you mentioned there, that's where the snow tended to hit. So Cavan was ruled out because of the snow. You obviously heard then that obviously Brewster Park and Enniskillen, let's say that area wouldn't have been available then because the Laois Fermanagh football game, that was called off. So there was limitations then to where exactly that they could go. Now, the official word that I got was that Schlockneil were on the road and were prepared to play the game wherever it was possible. And I was told officially that Schlockneil were prepared to even go to Clonmel to play it as a doubleheader if the ground was fit enough to do it. That's how anxious they were to play the game. Sarsfields wanted the game played this weekend just passed as well. So I think the Camogie Association then did everything in their power that was possible. The issue that ultimately I would have is that, there would be grounds that would have turned them down on the basis of that just didn't want the game on their pitch because of the wintry conditions or whatever. And we know this with the Camogie Association, and probably to a little effect as well with the LGFA, that they are turned down on numerous occasions when it comes maybe to weather conditions are quite tricky. Their opportunities then to get venues are quite limited, and people have got to remember that. And it's fine for Eddie Brennan to go along and tweet that the game is down in Wexford, and I saw a few other notable media and male GA players commenting about it. It's fine, but they don't seem to understand. And then we have the GPA come out yesterday that it's all about integration and we need equality, and you have Conor Myler coming out saying, that male role models have to step up and make a shout on this. So I would prefer Eddie Brennan to be commenting about how we need to look after the women who play GA in this country, rather than commenting about the association and the fact that the match was played in Wexford and trying to vilify them in some way that game was played there. So, look, I don't think they were left in any great situation. I would feel for them, and I do think it's a woeful situation that the game had to be played in Gorey. But with, as you said, 25 hours notice, there was very little option.
Yeah. Sarah, what was your take on it? I mean, some of the venues that were being proposed just weren't available as well. The Connacht Centre of Excellence was mentioned, but Leitrim and London already been moved to there. I think even some of the other 3G pitches that were available, like Ballinakil in Haywood, was in use for a ladies' football game because that had been moved out of O'Moore Park. The actual options for venues, even leaving the integration to one side on this, there just simply weren't too many venues that were actually available a day out. No,
and as much as I sympathise with Schlockneil and Sarsfields to want to play the game at such short notice, there was a duty of care to the players, and there was a 3-hour journey for Sarsfields girls and a 3.5-hour journey for the Schlockneil girls. I believe the Schlockneil girls stayed in Bray the night before. That's, another financial outlay that they don't necessarily need, considering we're an amateur sport. So in hindsight, perhaps while the game was played, perhaps the game should have been put off. We have to have contingencies in these situations. And obviously both teams were thinking the match is on in Croke Park on the 6th of March. We need to not be playing the week before because the other teams, will have an advantage. They'll have had their game played. But ultimately, I think the players suffered because of the drama around the Saturday, Sunday. And while the game obviously was incredibly exciting, I wonder, do the players today feel like perhaps they should have stepped away and said, let's play it when it's suitable for everybody?
It probably depends, Sarah, whether you're on the winning side or not. If you're Sarsfields, you're probably thinking, we got the result, we're now going to Croke Park. If you're Schlockneil, maybe you're feeling all that drama, getting accommodation sorted the night before, having to chase down to Gorey, then play a game. You might just look back at it and say, hey, we should have put the foot down and said, let's play next week.
What would men's teams have done in that situation? Ultimately they probably wouldn't have been without a pitch because it's their association and it's their pitches and they have that accommodation available to them. But I don't think that decision would have been made 25 hours out in a men's competition of that stature.
Yeah, they probably would have even looked to pushing back the finals if required at that point.
Yes.
In terms of what happened last weekend, Killian, I'll give you the first shout on Owlert here because you were doing the commentary with Lane Aylward on the Camogie Association's YouTube on Sunday afternoon. Is it simplistic to look at it as in the coin toss actually was very significant in this game, that Owlert get the wind, use the wind quite sensibly, get themselves a 10-point lead, and that was always going to make it difficult for Scariff to come back? Or is the narrative a bit more nuanced than that?
Well, you could say that if you were an outsider looking in at it, but in actual fact, Oulart played better against the wind than they did with it in lots of ways, because the game that they play, it suited them to hold on to possession in that second half and then pickpocket when they had to. And you just got to show that when obviously in the second half they found Una Lacey far easier than they did when they had the wind in the first half, because a lot of ball tended to head to the sides, or it actually maybe trickled towards the end line for Una not being able to, maybe make use of it, whereas then it was a far better situation in the second half. But look, there's no doubt about it, when the wind was coming from the Care direction down into the dressing room end of Clonmel Commercial's GA grounds, you had the scenario where whoever had it was obviously going to have to make the most of it. Now, it would have been intriguing to see what would have happened with Scariff if they had it, but I still think, looking at the game as a whole, going in at half time, I don't think it was insurmountable, but Scariff just never got a chance, never got a foothold at all, because they had 2 or 3 opportunities in that first half against the wind, and they really needed to take them, and they were kind of rushed and harried out of it by an Oulart group that just had that fire in the belly, that they were going to just withhold any opportunity that Scariff threw at them, and then Scariff just had a mountain to climb. But they're coming out, they're full of enthusiasm, and I do think a little bit naive as well when they came out at the start of the second half. Well, there was a shower starting to fall just as they left the dressing room. Oulart stayed in the dressing room, and Scariff were out standing on the pitch for 3 or 4 minutes in that. And, that's all little things. I think you learn from those experiences. Oulart are around long enough now at this stage, and, use it to their advantage. But, the game is done and dusted then when you have a fine bit of skill that sets up Una Lacey, and she's able to bang away a goal, and she follows that up with a spectacular goal then about 10 minutes later.
Yeah, Sarah, we're talking about the experience that Oulart have accumulated over the last decade, from their first All-Ireland club title through to the success they had in the middle of December of last year. Again, that experience comes to the fore at the weekend. Like Una Lacey is one of those players who makes the most of every good ball that comes into her, especially that goal that she was able to kind of strike first time at the weekend. Like, her knees might be gone, but still she's able to be there as the most potent finisher in Camogie, club championship level at least at the moment. And then you've Ursula Jacob again, who played a bit of a different role without the wind at the weekend, where she'd come a little bit deeper to help them out, but still she scores 1-5. That experience helped them in the All-Ireland final, and again, those players are still spearheading their attack 10 years on from Raiden Crow Park for the first time.
Those 2 players are once-in-a-generation players, and I don't think we'll see the likes of them again, just in terms of their longevity and their skill set. 2007 All-Ireland final club, or All-Ireland Camogie final, we lost to Wexford, and Una had 3 goals before we could catch our breath. So Una Lacey has been haunting me since 2007. But I just think for Oulart, right, I read a piece during the week, Una's not training very much. They're just managing her, because ultimately on the edge of the square there is no one deadlier than her, and her teammates respect the fact that she can't train. In some other teams you'll have that kind of negativity about, oh, she's not turning up to the pitch tonight, she's not fit enough, she's not up to the pace of it. And Oulart clearly have accepted her limitations, and they're getting full value for Una on the edge of the square. And the same with Ursula to score 1-5 the last day and be able to play those different kind of roles. She's watching hurling week in and week out. She's analysing it on the Sunday game, and then she's coming to the pitch and doing exactly what she's talking about on a Sunday night. I just think she's in the prime of her career right now.
Well, Sarsfield's gone back into the final as well, Sarah, in the back of was real battle, went extra time, a bit like some of the other matches at the weekend with a junior game with Clonmorris and O'Harney, which also had to be slugged out all the way through extra time. But goals proved so important within that game. And again, Siobhan McGrath scores from a penalty, which was a bit of a killer blow for Slaughtneil when they were chasing back into the game at the time. Sarsfield's just about having enough, and now they've every motivation going back into this final to try and get one over Oulart, when the pain of Nolan Park will be so fresh in the memory as well.
That's what's going to make it such a phenomenal game. I think from Sarsfield's point of view, they needed that game against Slaughtneil more than perhaps Oulart needed, a big game. Oulart need to just take over. They have the momentum. They've pulled together some really great performances, and Sarsfield's hadn't to that point. They hadn't been firing. So to get them over the line against Slaughtneil, massive confidence going into the final. I feel for Slaughtneil, because obviously they've been the bridesmaids now for the last 2 years, but Lochgiel, their Ulster counterparts, will probably say we've been feeling like that for nearly 7 years. So unfortunately for Slaughtneil, it's a bitter pill to swallow, but I definitely think the two best teams are in the final right now, and that's no surprise because in Camogie the momentum over like 3 or 4 months, teams become very efficient very quickly. So going from 2020 into 2021, and then you have the college championships, and we're talking about the intermediate All-Ireland, the likes of Kate Kenny playing for St. Rina's, playing for DCU last week. Those players just racking up games week on week, and that's what's making them so efficient and so good right now.
What will Sarsfields have learned from the final a couple of months ago then that they can maybe implement against Oulart this time round? Because to my untrained eye at least, Oulart took control of that game in the second half and were very, very impressive. What do Sarsfields have to do differently at Croke Park if we're going to have a different result this time round?
Look, it's the bear on the square, isn't it? Una Lacey scored 3 goals the last day. It looked like she was left isolated, and I think there was a bit of naivety there. I'm not for playing a sweeper, but certainly the Sarsfields defence can't allow her isolated on the square on her own. I don't know who's going to pick up Una in the end. They're probably all having nightmares about the possibility of it, but from the point of view of Sarsfields, I think Copper McGrath has to look at that and try and stop Una from getting the ball. 3 goals, that was the difference in the final the last time.
Yeah, and ultimately it might be about trying to cut down the supply which is coming into her as well. Because
I don't actually think that's possible because of the likes of Inez Kern, Stacey Keogh, Shelley Keogh, Ursula. They are absolutely flying it. But the end product was obviously Una being able to put away those scores. So shutting off Una, does that help?
And that's the thing, Will, just on that, that Sarsfields would have done that a little bit in Nolan Park. It's their game plan. They do have a sitting extra defender, and they still weren't able to eliminate Una Lacey in that situation. Just to go back a little bit to Scariff, though, they did play it in the first half. They did play Susan Vaughan in front of Una Lacey, but that was the scenario then when maybe they were thinking that with the wind, Oulart were going to pepper in ball in Una Lacey. That didn't necessarily happen, and I suppose Scariff did do what they needed to do with Una Lacey in the first half. The problem was then when they had a 10-point lead to chase, they had to push up and not play, I suppose, Susan Vaughan sitting in that space, and sure, that created a huge amount of space for Ursula Jacob then to drop onto the 40, and she was just able then to place the ball inside to Una Lacey. The second goal, Will, though, if you get a chance to see it again, the flick from Manae Kern in the conditions into Una Lacey is phenomenal.
Yeah, they're going to be incredibly difficult to stop attack-wise when March the 6th come round. Sarah, thanks a million for joining us.
Very good, thank you.
We can hear from the Sarsfields camp then, because defender Laura Ward was speaking to Tommy Devan on Galway Bay FM after their victory against Slaughtneil.
Defence starts in the forwards and that full forward line. The way they worked was unbelievable. The ball coming into us wasn't the best ball for Slaughtneil forward, so it helped us a lot. The girls up in the forwards they worked so hard, but the backs, they were brilliant today under serious conditions.
You were probably a little bit disappointed yesterday morning when you heard the game was called off, but glad to play today and make the long 3.5 hour journey which it was for a lot of people to come here today, and it makes it worthwhile though when that final whistle goes after extra time and you're pint up.
Yeah, we're on the right side of it now. It's going to be a long journey for Slaughtneil, but sure, look, we're used to these kind of things being thrown at us, and you just have to get your heads right again, and we're just delighted to have gotten it played this weekend and not to be pushed out another week.
2 weeks time it's off to Croke Park, Laura, again. It's where every Camogie player wants to play in, and the opposition, repeat of last year's final, Oulart the Bala. We know what they bring to the table, so it's going to be one to prepare for the next 2 weeks and get everybody behind you going to Dublin.
Yeah, absolutely, it's one to prepare for, and sure, look, we know Oulart the Bala are absolutely unbelievable, and they're going to throw even more at us than what they did last year before Christmas. They're an absolutely outstanding side, and we've such a big test ahead of us, but I suppose we have to put our heads down now for the next 2 weeks and try prepare for 2 weeks' time.
Mouth-watering final ahead, a repeat of last year's final at Croke Park on March the 6th. That's going to be the second game of a double header. It will be preceded by the intermediate final, which will pit 2 teams from neighbouring counties. St. Rhinus of Offaly, the defending champions, who are going for 2 in a row, their third All-Ireland final in a row, secured with a victory against Galtier A very hard fought game for both teams. That was a repeat of last year's final. St. Rhinus winning by 2-11 to 1-11. It was a penalty from Offaly Jewel player Roisin Egan that proved the difference between the teams. A little bit more comfortable for Salthill Knocknacarga at Abbottstown against Portaferry of Down. The Galway champions winning by 10 points to 1-4. So that'll be a 2 p.m. throw-in at Croke Park on Sunday week. We're still awaiting the full lineup for the junior final. That's because the second semi-final between Owen Rua of Derry and Athleague of Roscommon had to be postponed until this coming weekend. Clonmorris have carried the first team into the final, their third successive All-Ireland junior final as well. They overcame Raharney, the defending champions from Westmeath, by 10 points to 1 goal and 5 in very testing conditions in Banagher after extra time on Sunday afternoon. I think Raharney only scored 2 points in about a 30-minute spell. That just goes to show how difficult it was, particularly with the wind at the weekend. Right, time for us now to have a look back at the hurling and football championships. We didn't get a chance to review it in detail because we're chatting to both the Ballygunner and Kilcoo camps. I'm sure they're going to come up in our conversation here as well. But Donnchadh Boyle of the Independent is with us now, and Killian Whelan is back as well. Donnchadh, how are you getting on?
Good, Will. How are you?
Yeah, like lots to look back on in the championships. I mean, we were talking about all of the drama last week, which came in the two finals particularly. We weren't treated to two brilliant finals, but we were treated to brilliant drama at the end of both of them. And who would have ever guessed, Donnchadh, that we'd have last gasp goals actually deciding both of them?
Yeah, it was Hollywood script stuff. I was in Corrigan Park and Belfast. I was covering Antrim and Dublin the day of the finals, and I was working in the bar there in the Johnny's Clubhouse, as they call it, just doing up the match report. And there was a little bit, Antrim hurling supporters were sort of a little bit down, and then there was just this massive roar. And I don't think it was anything to do with loyalties. No one had any. I don't think anyone there in the room had a dog in the fight, but it was just the story, the nature of it, the goal, Harry Ruddle's goal in the last minute. Like how he basically, from the moment he got the ball, he had absolutely nothing in his mind except stick it in the net. And it was just pure riot or over stuff. I think someone else described it as that, and that's exactly what it is, because it was too perfect. A sub, we heard a little bit more about him afterwards, which we'll probably get into, and that he just found the only place that he could put it, and he hit it in that moment, and that was the last kick of the game. So it was fantastic, and the football as well was as dramatic too. So there were two outrageous finals. Maybe not two brilliant games, as you said, looking back at them, probably not ones that go down as classics, but in terms of finishes, they won't be big. No,
you just tuned in for the last few minutes of both finals. You would think they were the best of all time. I still think it was probably the best hurling final we've had since maybe the 2018 decider, which was a really good game between Na Piarsaigh and Coola. We've had a couple of blowouts in the last 10 years in the hurling, so it was great that it was still in the melting pot into the final stages. And again, there was something very Kilcoo about the fact that they found an answer at the end of the game with Jerome Johnson putting the ball into the net. We're going to have a look, Killian, at kind of moments of the championship. We're also looking at players of the championship, and over the last 24 hours yourself and Donnchadh having a thought. Can I get your feeling first, Killian, on who were the players that really impressed you? I'll let you kick off either hurling or football to start with here.
Well, I was just going to lead with the football there, I suppose, in one sense. Obviously Sheelan Johnson was a guy that really came to the fore. I suppose he's been talked about a lot in definitely in the last maybe 12 months or whatever as a standout player for 2022. But I just thought throughout the championship he was definitely a factor. Obviously the youngest of the Johnson brothers, but definitely a lad that was chipping in on occasion when needed, and again was there at the big moment. Looking at one or two of the games that I would have seen in Leinster, I think it was great, and I know I'm rolling back. I'm probably a little bit biased here in some ways, having seen an awful lot of them over the last 15 to 20 years or thereabouts, but I just thought Eamon Callaghan showed the way again. A guy with 39 years of age, had never obviously scored in Leinster, and then I think ended up being either the top scorer in the top few anyway of the whole championship within the province. It didn't work out on the day, and I know the disappointment of him, and seeing himself and the picture with his young son Fionn there at the end, was probably brought it all back home, and it brought back to daddy duties when he was being asked if he had any jellies from his son, but just a phenomenal piece of play by him. Again, they would have probably stood out, but again, you would have been impressed by Kilmacud overall, that just how on occasion they could have been gone in a number of games. Port Arndon probably had them by the neck a little bit, and they just let the grip go, and obviously Kilmacud then were able to see it home, and I think they did that as well in the Leinster final. It just, I suppose they were Kilmacudded by Kilcoo in some ways then in the All-Ireland final. But you'd have to give great credit to the Dublin and Leinster champions, I think, for the part that they played in the championship this year. But, also maybe just deferring back to Naas as well, I think a lad we're going to see a little bit more. We heard a lot about Derek Irwin last year, so I suppose he's not maybe a man that stands out to too many people this year. But watch out for Paddy McDermott. I think he's a guy that we're going to hear an awful lot more of, both on the club scene and maybe on the county scene in the coming years. A kind of marauding wing back who plays very, very much to the metal. He just never lets up, and is also willing to be able to chip in with a couple of scores. And guy that came to the forefront, playing with Naas CBS and getting to All-Ireland finals at the schools level. But definitely, I think a player we're going to see a lot over the next while.
Donnchadh, not looking to preempt your pick here at all, but it's interesting to hear Killian talking about the combination of very young players who are coming through and wants to watch, and also some of the older players in their late 30s who've been so crucial. And I'm thinking of Conor Lafferty with Kilcoo this year as well. It's the thing about the club and maybe the romance of all this. We get to see people on the way up, and you get to see those who are making hay with the last few years of their career as well.
Yeah, and I think it's the nature of a club. I think a good club team will always have a little bit of both ends of the scale that have the experience and the exuberance of youth. You saw that with pretty much all the winners in both the winners. In hurling and football. A lot of what Killian said there, I'd agree with. I do think Naas was a great story when you go back to the fact that they lost their manager in the middle of it, and maybe what we forgot in the midst of all that too is that they waged a very successful hurling campaign. So they had an extraordinary year, in both the positive sense and then in the negative sense, where they had to sort of think on the hoof, and they were effectively they were self-managed in the end, which we put an awful lot of stock in the manager, and rightly so most of the time, but they just had a good team and they knuckled down and they made it work. That was an extraordinary story. And there was loads of other little ones around the GAA, even before we got into the sort of business end of the provincial championship. Go think of Allier winning without Tony Kelly. You know what I mean? That we probably would have written that off straight away as soon as he was unavailable, but they still found a way to do it. We had, was it Mullinlock then down in parish neighbours in the trying to win county senior football titles in different provinces at one stage in Longford and Cavan. So, there was threw up all these things over and over and over again, and the club championships have an uncanny ability to do that. They throw up things, and we've said it here before, they're quite niche, but when they get the attention, I think they deserve that level of attention, because you don't really get it in any other part of the GAA other than the club level.
Killian, look, you're working not too far away from Naas at the moment. You're a teacher in Kildare. The hurling side I find entirely intriguing, that really over the last 10 years or so there's been so much effort put in that club, and talk about bearing fruit when they've now won themselves an All-Ireland club intermediate title. They're going to go into Leinster Senior Championship for next year. This has to be hugely beneficial for Kildare down the track as well, given how many players from Naas are involved with the Kildare hurling team currently too. They're now going to be getting exposure to very good club hurling. That's assuming that they win Kildare next year, of course, and come out at the club championship. But if they're playing provincial senior and getting that type of quality of opposition with a quite young panel, a lot of guys around 23, 24 in that panel, that has to be hugely beneficial for Naas and Kildare hurling down the line.
Yeah, and I suppose the catalyst for that, would be to look at Mount Leinster Rangers. When they won, obviously, the intermediate title, they went up in, obviously, Carlow, then advancing into the Leinster Senior Championship, and we saw them get all the way to an All-Ireland Senior final against Portumna. So I think Naas would be kind of looking at that, and the man that's driving it, obviously, is the Mount Leinster Rangers man in their manager, Mullally. So, the scenario for Naas is that, they would have been known as, obviously, a stopgap, maybe a club that commuters ended up with because they were, coming from the likes of Tipperary and the Galways and the Corks and Waterford maybe or whatever, and they ended up near Dublin, and Naas tended to be an area. But there's only one guy from that panel was an outsider, and he's a guy that's been around a long time from Tipperary, teaching in the area. Shane Walsh is his name, but all the rest of them were homegrown. They've been competing in Kilkenny at underage level for the last number of years now, and that obviously buoys it up as well. I know a number of these guys wouldn't have been competing in Kilkenny at that time, but the production line that's coming at Naas for for both football and hurling, Will, is actually quite scary for the rest of Kildare, I think, in some ways, because they could be dominant for a long time if that was to be the case. Now, I know the footballers appointed a new manager yesterday in Joe Murphy, the former Éire Óg and Carlow footballer, and obviously Éire Óg manager. He won 4 Carlow titles in the last 5 years, but Amanda has experience at Kildare football scene previously as well. So, he's obviously aware of the talent that is there, and there's an opportunity maybe knocking around for Naas that we'll see them compete at the top table again, Will, within the province. But going back to the hurlers for a minute, it's a phenomenal effort, I think. It just goes to show you the effort that was put in among the club there to drive that forward. And when you're taking down the clubs from maybe this, the stronger counties of the Kilkennys and the Wexfords and so forth, I know still that they're the intermediate champions in those, but they're still competitive. The Glenmores and the Oilgates, they still would be quite highly rated within their own counties. It just goes to show you where maybe I should say hurling, apologies for the slip of the tongue there, hurling is at within Naas at the moment.
Donnchadh, this was a year as well that probably proved that the dual club is not finished just yet either. We look at even some of the big counties where dual doubles were actually achieved, like with Kilmacud Crokes, with Naas. We had Lockmore Castleiney particularly, again, backing up their previous double in Tipperary by doing it again this time round. There's that kind of mantra out there that it's very difficult to actually do both, particularly in a bigger county. But this year showed it can be done.
I think it is very difficult to do both, and I think that's why it needs to be celebrated as much as possible, because I think you're going to probably see less of it rather than more of it, I think, if we're being honest at the minute. The Lockmore story in particular was outrageous, really. I think by the time they lost to Éire Óg in the Munster Football Championship, it was their 18th consecutive weekend of championship action, and as we know, largely the same group of players, a massive overlap between the two of them. So that was an extraordinary effort. And as well as that, when you consider the manner in which they've been beaten the previous year and then the manner in which they won it this year, both times they sort of like grounded out at the end, came back from, produced the last gasp score to get the thing over the line. And then we saw some of the pictures and the images from it, like it was just extraordinary. But I think the Lockmore thing, and while they didn't go too deep into the provincial series in the Ido Code, I do think that has to be lauded massively. And the rest of the clubs who did similar, like it's I was doing just a piece on the Sigerson and Fitzgibbon last week, and I was talking to someone involved in it, and we were just talking that UL had one player overlapping in the two panels, and that's at an age where maybe you have a little bit more time to do it at club level, where with the same group of players, where you have to, like, there's no way around it. If you are hurling one night of the week and playing football the other night of the week, it suffers versus the club who's doing only one or the other. So to keep fighting on two fronts and then to win on two fronts is just extraordinary. And as I say, hats off to the clubs who managed that this year.
I think, Killian, when it comes to the Munster campaign for Lockmore Castleiney, eventually those kind of 20 or so weeks that they were on the road from a club campaign, and particularly, as Donnchadh mentioned, 18 weeks in a row, it's just recovery that catches up with you at some point. Because if you come off the field from losing a football quarter-final the week before, then you're facing into playing Ballygunner the next week, it's almost impossible, whatever physically but also emotionally, to be able to recover in that short a space of time, really.
Yeah, I think the winning factor is a part to play there, because that helps recovery, I think, no question about it, because if you're on the run, but after losing, then that probably lets a little bit of air out of the balloon a little bit, and that probably had an impact then when you're going back in on the Tuesday night. Now, I know you're still thinking, God, we're still on a winning front here, we're playing Ballygunner, we've an opportunity, to get to a Munster final here, but it had to obviously just dent the confidence that little bit. And then, when you're coming up against a Ballygunner side that definitely had the bit between the teeth this year, they're just on such a run. But a lot of people would have probably criticised them over the last few years that they hadn't got to the top table. So I think they were kind of anxious to start putting those kind of talk and everything like that to put it back in its box, let's say. And I think that's what drove on Ballygunner. But it just goes to show you that the respect that probably Ballygunner, and I know people down in Lockmore still feel a bit sore about some of the physical encounters that's happened that day, but it just goes to show you what Ballygunner were prepared to do to stop Lockmore, because they obviously rated them as going to be one of their toughest opponents, and so it ultimately turned out to be. When you look at the rest of the campaign, I know obviously Ballyhale are the ultimate kingpins there, but the effort that Ballygunner went to make sure that Lockmore didn't get on top of them in any way in that Munster semi-final just goes to show you. But it's a phenomenal effort. Will I be well versed in what happens down around that part of the world as well over the years, but they're just an uncanny group. They just really, if you go down and get involved in Lockmore, they really bring you in and you feel ultimately part of the situation. But they're just a phenomenal group of people, and it is, as Donnchadh rightly pointed out, an extraordinary story ultimately.
Yeah, physicality.
And it's brave as well, lads, isn't it? Like to pursue both things evenly.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? As soon as you make that decision at club level or board level, executive level, that you say, right, we're not going to take one over the other, we're going to pursue both of these things, you're probably damaging both your causes, but you're doing it for all the right reasons, if you know what I mean. So if you, we'll never know, but if Lockmore only hurled this year, or put most of their concentration on one or the other, or any of the clubs for that matter, would it have made a difference? Particularly for those clubs that had a massive overlap, would it have made a difference? We'll never know, but as soon as the decision is made to pursue both and go after both, it's a brave decision at board level, because you are absolutely robbing Peter to pay Paul. I don't think anyone would deny that, but they still went after and still won loads, and they maybe ultimately it cost them. We don't know. We'll never know, but I do think it's something to be lauded.
Well, look, in recent years, our show sponsors, AIB, have sponsored players of the championship from each province, which we'll probably hear about very soon on the back of the All-Ireland Championships themselves. We're picking out players who've really stood out. I know you mentioned Eamon Callan already, Killian, but if I was to push you for a hurler who really impressed you in the club championships this year, I don't mind what grade you picked them from.
Well, I'd have to say, I'm going to give a nod ultimately to a senior player here, but I think one man that probably doesn't get a huge amount of credit, because I think he goes about his job under the radar that little bit and covers some amount of ground, and I'm hoping he gets to grace the Leinster Senior Championship next year from a Naas point of view, is Brian Byrne. Brian Byrne played in both the Naas hurling and football teams this year, centre back on the hurling team. He can play anywhere from centre back to full forward on the hurling team, and he scores at various different times for the hurlers this year. Got them out 1 or 2 holes, definitely in the county final as well. But I think he's a guy, to me, has to be given some amount of credibility on this show anyway, for the effort that he made with Naas this year. But I definitely think Desi Hutchinson for me was a lad that obviously went to the well so many times with this Ballygunner team, and to me is the pick out. I know Harry is obviously going to get the plaudits, and I'm sure Harry will never have to put his hand in his pocket again down around Ballygunner in lots of ways. But Desi was just phenomenal, and a man has played multiple sports, and it just goes to show he can reach the top.
Yeah, I think he'd be my club hurler of the year as well, purely, if nothing else, because of the way he delivered in big games, Donnchadh, in the year gone by. Munster final, incredible performance, and then he ran the show and scored 1-6 in the All-Ireland final just a couple of weeks ago as well. They're the type of players you need that are difference makers on the big day.
Yeah, when we were chatting about this last night and we were talking about what will we look at and who will we talk about and stuff, I didn't look that far past him for my club hurler of the year. His form, his stats, his score, and all that speaks for itself. But I think it's pretty remarkable too that he missed a huge amount of hurling in the formative part of his career, when he was away with Brighton and when he was pursuing a career in soccer. And we always hear about that once you lose your touch, very hard to get the eye in. And he kind of, as soon as he come back, he was in with the Waterford team. He came into a Waterford team which I think up to 2020 had drawn one of their previous 8 championship matches. Remember that horrible run they were on? So he came into a team that wasn't necessarily going that well, and we know what they've done since they've been in an Ireland final. And I think every game that's gone on, he seems to have gotten better, be it just his eye is in, or maybe he's just adapted to the requirements of the game. And he was already very good when he arrived first. So I do think he was the standout for me. I remember doing a little bit of a piece with Benji Whelan, the former Waterford football manager, and Benji actually had him in with the footballers before he got in with the hurlers, because I think one of his brothers was in with the footballers at the time, so they basically drafted him in straight away. And Benji has a background in physiology, studied it in Trinity College, and he was just talking about his movement, his athleticism, and his his balance. He says that it's very close to elite level. So he had the raw materials, and I suppose he got a lot of hurling under his belt since. I don't think it's any surprise that his most recent form is probably his best and most consistent form, because every time he goes out, every game he plays, he's naturally going to get better. So there's loads more to come from him.
All right, well, Desi Hutchinson then is our Hurler of the Year on the Club Championship show. Donnchadh, who are you picking for the most impressive footballer of the season then?
There was a little bit more thinking on this one. We mentioned Sheelan Johnston, Killian mentioned earlier on, and I think what got overlooked in the furore or sort of that last minute goal was his pass right into, was it his brother Ryan? Mm. It had to be, it couldn't be lofted, it had to be direct to the chest, it couldn't be bounced into him, because it had to get there to within a split second. Otherwise the ball was going to be, Ryan would have been crowded out and he probably would never got the shot away. That pass, I think, was quite extraordinary under that pressure to deliver, and it was so delicate and so precise. I thought he was brilliant. I was very impressed too with Ryan McAvoy. It's a little bit jarring. He sometimes wears number 3, wears it a lot, and he takes the freeze on occasion. And I covered their game against Derry Gonley. I thought he was really good that day, and I thought he could produce some big moments as well at other stages through the campaign, the bits I saw. And assuming he's involved, he's going to be a huge player for Down. There was a few others that caught my eye, and we'll always go back to Conor Laverty, just because of his story and how long he's chasing this dream, and he goes in. But I have to be honest, I was very impressed with Ryan McAvoy. He was a good mix of, I suppose, a little bit of steel, loads of football, loads of discipline. He's quite young as well. I think he really came on the scene in that final against Corofin a few years ago. But I'm gonna go for Ryan McAvoy, just because of what I saw of him and the days I was keeping a close eye on them. I thought he was excellent.
Well, let the debate begin. I'm already looking forward to looking at the YouTube comments on this, where people are going to say we're horrifically wrong on both, and we'll probably get tweets in the middle of the night on a Saturday to say that we picked entirely the wrong players. But hey, this is just part of the business, lads. Donnchadh, Killian, thanks a million for joining us on the Club Championship show. Next week is going to be a bumper preview of the Camogie finals, which are coming up on the 6th of March. We'll be talking to participants from both sides of the senior final. So looking forward to that next Wednesday at 10:30. Thanks for watching.
The Club Championship show on OTB Sports in partnership with AIB, proud sponsors of the Football, Hurling and Camogie All-Ireland Club Championships. #the toughest.